was the California Green Job Corps. This was a youth program targeting youth 14 to 24, at-risk youth for the most part. And we gave $10 million out to 11 grants statewide. We required a community service component of this, where the kids had to go out and work in the community doing community service for a certain number of hours. They also had to have classes in civic engagement and environmental stewardship so that they could learn how understanding of natural resources, how can I help in my community, those types of things. We worked with California volunteers very closely with this, so it kind of mirrored the AmeriCorps program that they operate. Some of the preliminary results of this program has just ended, and we're still gathering information in terms of how well it did. Half of the individuals received some type of a degree, diploma, or an industry-recognized certificate through the training, and about 30% of those have entered unsubsidized employment. So in this down economy for youth, it's probably not too bad. Some examples of the work that they did: urban farming, environmental restoration with rivers and streams and that kind of thing, energy efficiency, going in and doing energy auditing, weatherization, and then solar installation. The next one out was one of the largest, and this is our star, I think, because this is where we worked with the Energy Commission. They brought money to the table, their state energy partners money, which was $14.5 million. We brought Workforce Investment Act money, around $10 million, and then the AB 118 brought $2.2 million. This turned out to be one of the largest clean energy programs in the nation. With the match money and all of the different funding sources that we brought, it was over $60 million. It targeted 5,600 individuals that are either unemployed, underemployed, or incumbent workers. Right now, this program is, again, one that is wrapping up. We have very preliminary results of it. 44% of those that have completed have entered unsubsidized employment. We have some areas that are doing better than others. And looking and talking to some of the grantees, some of the big problems they're having is, of course, the economic downturn. And this program started back 2-3 years ago when the economy was a little bit better. I had an example in San Diego where they said that when they started, their unemployment rate was 5%. As of March, it was up to 10.5%, so it almost doubled. So they're dealing with high unemployment. They also were banking the program on those federal and state loan programs that didn't come through, the PACE program and the Homestar program. And I applaud that AB 114, the new one. I'm not going to get it right because I finally, I think they're going to applaud that too, because what happens is the jobs just aren't there. They aren't being created. So we've got this trained workforce right now that's ready to get to those jobs, and it hasn't happened yet. So we were kind of on the forefront. I think it will happen, but it's just now we're trying to hold those folks getting ready for that big push. The Clean Energy Workforce Training Program, and we call it QTIP, had 3 components to it, and I'll go through it very quickly. This was the retraining partnership part of it. What this did is took construction workers who were laid off during the economic downturn and rebuilding their skills to green type of occupations. So that included building principles, state energy code licensing, those types of things. So that was the focus of that. The next one was a pre-apprenticeship program, which took unemployed people, new workforce entrants that didn't have any construction experience, and then gave them those basic things that they needed to get into that type of industry. And then the third piece of it was the alternative, the AB 118 part of it, alternative and renewable fuel technology. And basically what that is doing is trying to focus on incumbent workers, existing, that are like in the automotive industry, to learn the new hybrid technologies and those types of things, to upgrade their skills to learn that.
So was this, if you were a participant in this program, was it mostly through community college where you actually went to physically get this training, or was it what other sort of?
Actually, this initiative was a community college and workforce investment board combining, so that the workforce investment board did the job placement and the outreach and that type of thing. Community colleges did the training. So it was a very good marriage of the two programs. And I think what this provided, too, was also an opportunity for community colleges to begin to be on the cutting edge of this new curriculum and develop the curriculum, work with the industry, and seeing what has changed and try to keep up with that. Community colleges hasn't done that very well in the past. I was very amazed by this, that they were able to develop curriculum quick enough and in response to what was needed in the real time. It was very good. The next one up was the Regional Industry Clusters of Opportunity. And I'm going to let Doug talk more about this. I know this was a Workforce Investment Board, California Workforce Investment Board project, so he can elaborate more on that. We did another quick solicitation. This was industry with a statewide need, and this was not only just green, but it was nursing and other industries that have a statewide demand for trainees. But part of this we focused on green, and we gave 5 grants, $4.2 million out to do specifically hybrid, alternative fuel, and green diesel. The California Workforce Investment Board, and Doug may talk more about this, applied for a Department of Labor grant, State Energy Sector Partnership. This Labor Secretary put out, I believe it was 100 and, I'm not going to get it right. Yeah, the national amount. I think it was 119 million. Anyway, we got 6 million of that. Lucky us. And it is industry focused on water, energy and water efficiency, renewable energy, alternative and renewable transportation. There's 6 grants running right now that are working on this. And I think Doug may touch a little bit on this too. I don't want to take over his presentation. Okay. Another initiative that we put out was the Green Initiative, Green Innovation Challenge. And what made this different from the other ones is this was really focused on industry. The big piece of this was that they had to have an industry partner that is actually leading this initiative. We funded 6 grants for a total of $19 million. They've been in operation just about a year now, and they're beginning to see some real results. I think this is going to be a very interesting program to watch. They are working with some pretty high-level industries. In the North State, they're doing a variety of things because the North State has a lot of different renewables and different technologies going on. But they're working with Solar Tech and the Propane Council in the North State. In San Diego, they're doing biofuel sector, and they're working with Clean Tech and Biocom. In San Mateo, they're doing the hybrid and electric vehicle maintenance and repair, and they're working with the automotive service councils that are the industry leader in that area. Bay Area, this is in our Workforce Investment Board, NOVA. They're working on renewable energy, and they're doing solar. They're working with Solar Tech, which is one of the big leaders in the industry. In San Jose, they're doing energy efficiency, and they're working with PG&E. They're working with the Building Performance Contractors Association there. And last is Los Angeles. They are doing water efficiency, and they're working with the city of LA and with the county and the power and utility companies to try to get better water efficiency going there. So these are good, exciting projects, I think, that we'll want to certainly keep an eye on. Recently, and this is the last one we've done, is we have a $5.4 million initiative we just awarded. And this is, I think, EDD's commitment and the California Workforce Investment Board and our labor agencies' commitment to continue these types of investment in the workforce. Again, this is very industry focused with green building, energy efficient, clean transportation. It's a pre-apprenticeship program, very strong labor ties in this one. We're going to move folks from a pre-apprenticeship program into a registered apprenticeship program. That's the real focus of this. And it expands the Q-tip model that we had before where they were doing pre-apprenticeship. So this is the next step into that. And to wrap up, I think, again, we were early implementing a training program, and I think that's why we kind of have a little false start with this. But I think that over the next year or so, with the economy hopefully turning around, we'll see much better results with this. And I think, again, I'll say that we've got the curriculums developed now. I think we have the experience behind us that will help us in the future.
Thank you. It would be nice to hear sort of at the beginning of next year and maybe in 6 months how we're doing on that connection between training and job placement, because we see that there's a little flux here.
Yep.
Well, let's move on to Ethan Elkin, with a fellow with the Bank of America Climate Change Research Group and through UC Berkeley School of Law. Isn't that Bolt School, or has they changed that?
It's Bolt still for alumni, but I think for development purposes, and they're going to Berkeley Law now. So thank you very much for having me. I'm just going to take a moment to get my PowerPoint up. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm Ethan Elkind with both UC Berkeley and UCLA Schools of Law. The two law schools, their environmental law centers, have joined together on a business and climate change research initiative sponsored by Bank of America. And the goal behind the program is to gather business leaders for dialogue with environmentalists, public sector leaders. It depends on the topic, but anything related to climate change, so that we can work with them to develop policy papers to help address some of the barriers and offer some solutions. So my presentation today will come out of one of those policy papers called Saving Energy. And we gathered a number of retrofit contractors, some folks from the public sector and nonprofits, and did some outside research as well to offer some solutions to how to retrofit these existing residences and small businesses. So much of my slideshow has already been covered, and I know it's late, so I'm going to get down to some of the brass tacks here. So first, I do want to give a snapshot of one of the programs that we worked with in our research, and that is the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program. And I got some updated job figures that I wanted to bring to the attention of the Select Committee today. So the program became operational in March 2009, and this data goes up until June of this year. I don't have this on the slideshow, but over that course of that time period, they've had over 24,000 inquiries into the program, and that included approximately 2,300 applications received. Out of those, they now have entered into contract with 1,628 different building owners. You can see from the slide that most of those are energy efficiency improvements, but it also 881 of those also involves financing for renewable energy generation and 54 for water. The sum total is 2,272 improvements, and they bonded over $43 million into this program to date. And by their estimates, the jobs that have been created from this economic activity is approximately 550 jobs. Interestingly, they did a survey in the calendar year of 2009 comparing construction jobs in Sonoma County with construction jobs in their neighboring counties. And they found that while Sonoma County experienced an increase of 7.5% in construction jobs during that time period, neighboring counties didn't come anywhere close to that. In fact, Napa and Solano counties actually experienced decrease in that sector, as I can imagine most of the counties around the state and the country experienced in construction. So while there's no definitive link there, they believe that this program had an impact on construction jobs. So part of the work that we do is identifying barriers to retrofits and any topic related to climate change. And we've all seen this list come up during the day. And Assemblywoman Skinner asked, of all these barriers, what is the most important? So I don't have to read through them, but to my mind, the most important one is the first one, which is a lack of awareness. Because really what we're looking at here is a lack of demand. And I think if you could see demand increase, it would drive solutions to the rest of these challenges. So I wanted to just flag that for the Assembly members today. And we tried to come up with solutions. We tried to develop different policy ideas that could work to raise awareness, to get people to want to invest in these retrofits. And the big one, as we've talked about, is marketing, and we now have the Energy Upgrade California to help coordinate that effort. But I think the big one, and hopefully AB 758 in the process that the Energy Commission is undergoing pursuant to that legislation, is that we have some sort of a trigger to both disclose energy use to new tenants or new potential purchasers of a building. And at some point, I think the state is probably going to have to move towards requiring either an audit or a retrofit at a particular time. Now, earlier we had a speaker here, I believe it was Bettina Redway, who was saying, well, if we're going to go up and put a new roof in, maybe that's a good time. And it also was mentioned that during this time of sale or time of leasing of a property would be an important moment. And I think that is what we have to zero in on. So I think looking at those times to try to trigger a retrofit would be critical. And I think also when we're trying to be very tactical in terms of what we're doing, I think the marketing aspect, as is mentioned previously, focusing that marketing on the areas where we can get the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to retrofits. So looking at areas of the state that have the biggest climate differences. For example, I live in San Francisco. I don't even own an air conditioning unit. I previously lived in Santa Monica. Same thing. If anything, my heating bill goes up in the summer in San Francisco because the fog rolls in. So we need to look at those areas of the state, particularly the Central Valley and the southern part of the state, and really target our marketing efforts to those areas.
So you think shame alone would not work? Just by disclosing how much energy is being used by a factory or a building there, that there's actually, when we do an audit or require a retrofit, that's a key element after we get the awareness.
Yeah, shame, I think, I wouldn't call it, I guess shame sounds so negative, but, I think for people to have it.
We're disclosing, here's your energy use, there's the building, people drive by. Yeah, that's the most inefficient building in our city.
I think of it more being used when people are about to buy a home or they're about to move into an apartment, for example, that the energy use of the previous building occupiers is disclosed to them. So they have a sense of what they're getting into. People, when they buy homes or when they're leasing a building, they're not going to know, they're not going to be thinking necessarily about energy bills. But that's something that can motivate them to want to take action and motivate them to want to invest before they move in, ideally, in some upgrades. So that's where I think the disclosure is really going to be critical. But it did come up at the workshop that we did, and I've heard the sense that energy efficiency is not exactly a sexy topic. It's easy when you put solar panels on a roof. It's flashy. Your neighbors see it. It's easy to kind of hook people in. Although even with solar panels, we're looking at just an early adopter kind of market. And with energy efficiency, how are you going to be able to tell your neighbors that you're super environmental when it comes to what you've done in your house? So
I was tempted to come here like Jimmy Carter with a little sweater on and sit here so people would get the hint, but I thought the better of it.
It's the equivalent of a building sweater, I think, that we need. We need to figure out some way where we can signal to everybody, hey, my house has a nice sweater on, and we're environmentally efficient that way. So that's where I think the state needs to go. But again, at some point, a targeted trigger, and perhaps we just look at those most energy. Maybe there's a certain list of criteria, certain homes of a certain vintage in a certain area of the state. Perhaps that we want to focus in on those buildings and have a requirement at some point. Financing, we've talked a lot about PACE. Just as a brief update, since I'm coming from the law school environment, in terms of the PACE lawsuits, it was mentioned earlier that the Attorney General has filed suit. That case is ongoing, but in the New York District Court, the case filed by NRDC and a town in New York was thrown out. So in terms of the litigation potential for overturning the FHFA decision, there's at very least going to be a split decision, and I think the best bet for PACE advocates would be this bipartisan legislation that was introduced in the House a few weeks ago. I also want to touch on energy-efficient mortgages. I don't believe this has come up yet today. This is where basically on top of an additional mortgage that a new home buyer would take out, they can take out an additional amount a mortgage that would cover specifically energy efficiency improvements, with the idea being that the savings they would get would be greater than the additional amount of money they have to pay on their mortgage payments. So we work with Bank of America. They have this program in place, but they told me that, quite frankly, a lot of their mortgage representatives aren't even aware of this program. So I think there's a lot that can be done on the lending side, the consumer lending side, to let people know about this option. And this could be a nice way to finance, particularly for new home buyers. It won't get at those who are renting or already own their homes, but when you're going in to get a mortgage, you could tack on an additional amount in that way.
So, I go into Bank of America. I've got a $500,000 house. Make it easy. I put 10% down. So I put $50,000 down, and I've got some disclosures on the energy efficiency. So they're financing whatever that is, $450,000. Now they're going to give me an energy efficient mortgage for, let's say we've got a list of $35,000 worth of stuff that needs to be done before I move in, and then we'll just place that, collateralize it, place it as a second, and I pay off of that. And they're actually doing that, because normally they take that risk factor, right? They say we don't want to have all our money. That countrywide 80% on the first and 20% on the second, sort of those days are gone, right? So they want to have some buy-in by the buyer. Is that how it works, or is it?
Yeah, no, that's how it works. There are guidelines to how to qualify to get that additional amount, but essentially, it's for the home buyer, it's a good deal because they don't have to put down an extra amount of down payment.
But it's driven by the building that you're buying. It is what it is. It's energy inefficient because it was built in 1949 and nobody did any upgrades, right?
Yes, exactly. So there's some guidelines associated with that would, but it's something that a lot of people aren't even aware of, and the mortgage representatives themselves are not necessarily letting people know exist. So again, this is not going to be the panacea of financing for retrofits, but I think this is an important option that I think there could be more awareness made about it. I don't know if we've talked today about on-bill financing, but it's another piece of the puzzle that I wanted to mention. And currently, the on-bill financing is available for commercial customers, where basically you could use money from your utility to finance an efficiency upgrade, and then you would pay that money back via your electricity bill, over time, similar in a way to how PACE would work, except this would be monthly on your utility bill. This program currently is not available to residential customers, and the reason that we heard as to why not is that the utilities are concerned about running afoul of consumer lending laws. So I think if there's some way to work around that, perhaps having private lenders partner up with utilities, where utilities are simply the vehicle for delivering the financing but not actually providing it themselves. In other words, they're the kind of middle people. Maybe that's a workaround around this concern, but I think it's something that could be worth exploring. And this is a potentially interesting financing method, not just for retrofits, but even for the electric vehicle market, which I know is not the subject of today's committee hearing. But I've heard one idea that since the battery component of an electric vehicle is such a significant part, there may be a way through a significant part of the purchase price. It's something like $12,000 to $15,000 of electric vehicles just for the battery. You could pay that back on-bill financing, and then you don't have to front that money with the purchase. It could drive down the cost a lot. So I think there's a lot of potential interesting applications for on-bill financing, and I think that the PUC might be able to do more to explore how they could make that work for residential customers. Also wanted to flag Mello-Roos financing. This SB 279 was vetoed by Governor Schwarzenegger in 2009, but this is for communities that want to be able to extend Mello-Roos financing to energy efficiency work. I think this is something that would be really important for the legislature to revisit, particularly now that we have a different governor. And from what I heard, rumor had it that Arnold Schwarzenegger had a bad experience with Mello-Roos districts in Brentwood, California, and that's why he vetoed it. So assuming that Jerry Brown hasn't had a bad experience, there might be more legs for this bill. Of course, tax credits and rebates, the Home Star program at the federal level has been talked about, but I think we've covered that so far. Another thing that hasn't been mentioned is the split incentive. It was mentioned briefly, but the split incentive, where we have a large portion of our housing stock occupied by renters, and they don't have the incentive to invest in capital improvements in the properties since they may move. This is
not just incentive, they don't have the ability, they don't have the right.
That's another issue as well.
Not so much the incentive, it's the right.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that if you went to your landlord and said, I'm going to pay for new windows, that a lot of landlords probably wouldn't say no, but yeah. That's a good point. So something that I think needs to be addressed because we have a large part of our housing stock is occupied by renters, and often in some of the hotter parts of the state. So different ways of getting around this. There are some common areas for multifamily housing that perhaps programs could focus on. Template agreements. Some nonprofits are working on this, where basically there's a kind of almost a revenue sharing formula in advance that the tenant would kick in a certain amount of money for an improvement, and the landlord would as well. This is a tough nut to crack, but these are kind of the latest and greatest that at least I've come across. Similarly, disclosing to tenants what the energy use is, as we had discussed earlier. This may create a kind of a market demand for more energy efficient rental units, particularly in more competitive markets. So if you're shopping for different apartments and you've got different utility statements and there's clearly a leaky window going on or something to drive up energy costs in one, it might tip you in favor of a more energy efficient unit, and then that would drive demand and encourage landlords to invest. And again, requiring retrofits for certain properties would get around this problem as well. And so lastly, in terms of kind of big picture policy points, I think the critical thing here is to be very targeted in our approach. We have limited resources, and we have homes in certain areas that we need to focus on because of the climate zones they're in or because of the nature of the housing stock. So find those areas and hone in on them. And that involves a certain mapping process that I think, I know that has been engaged at some level with the Energy Commission, but I think the PEER program might be able to do more on this. So we need good data. We talked about how utilities don't like to disclose this. There's privacy issues, but maybe there's ways around that by aggregating utility data from different residential areas. Streamlining the permitting, streamlining the financing. So when we have things like the PACE program, make the paperwork very straightforward, make the process for facilitating that conveyance of capital as straightforward as possible. And I think Energy Upgrade California is making great strides in that area. We've talked already about workforce standards, so I'm not going to get into that. And I'm going to conclude, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. All right, well, let's go to the Workforce Investment Board. We have Mr. Sale and...
I have one question before. On the on-bill financing issue, on commercial, it's kind of similar to ESCO companies, and where the ESCO company is willing to put up the capital because the retrofit will bring down the utility bill enough that they can project then the payback. Mm-hmm. Residential retrofitting is a bit trickier because it's a much longer payback period, and just depend. And the while it might be a large amount depending on what the homeowner's income is to their discretionary funds, it's still a small dollar amount monthly. So I guess what I'd be interested in, I haven't seen any studies on, is where's the price point? Where does it become efficient? Where does it, for example, when Mr. McAllister had his slide up and he showed what the cost I asked him, and he was all residential, so he showed that the cost was like $12,000 pre-rebate and $8,000 after rebate. Mm-hmm. And now I do have a small house. I do have, put in a bit of efficiency myself, but I calculated it would take me 20 years to pay back that $8,000. And so, I'm curious about what kind of studies have shown, or whether any have, and if there haven't been,
Yeah, maybe our research center could do that kind of study. It's a very good idea. This points to this issue of data and trying to get a better sense of where the bang for the buck is. And I think you raise an important concern. I think probably if the on-bill financing program were to be applied to residential customers, I think the PUC would be the ideal vehicle for convening perhaps a proceeding on that, and they might be able to investigate that. But I think there'd have to be some guidelines in the program to figure out when it makes sense, what types of retrofits would make the most sense and what types of time frames. So it could be that maybe that the on-bill financing would only be applicable for essentially smaller types of retrofits, the kind of... If the payback period made sense and if customers were willing to do it. So I think it's something that needs to be explored.
where I did the calculation is you said average 26% savings, so I did 26% of my annual bill, and it got me, I needed 20 years to get to the 8,000. Now, that's, I imagine, again, I have a small home and all that, and I don't have air conditioning, so but I would imagine that probably is not then cost-effective to administer in terms of an on-bill financing type of.
Sure. Oh, there you go. So I totally agree with the characterization of the residential on-bill finance. There are actually on-bill finance programs that the utilities enable, but they're done with third-party financing that's actually quite a bit more expensive, and so it's unsecured, sort of traditional unsecured, and there hasn't been a lot of uptake on it. So the goal with on-bill finance is to get those prices down. Once you get a loan or some finance product that's less than about $3,000 to $5,000, it's kind of not really worth going to the credit markets at all. And so people tend to say, okay, well, there's just got to be a way to get that done without actually having to go through the paperwork of getting financing. And I think really just the final point is that the PUC and utilities have been kind of in this dance for quite a while about whether they can kind of force the utilities to do on-bill financing, or I think PACE was and is still kind of an alternative to that sort of gets around a lot of these problems. And so, we may, on-bill financing would be great, and if you talk to Hank Ryan or some of the other folks that are really promoters of it, it has, the Small Business Association has a lot of potential, definitely for the commercial market, and the residential market may be a niche there, but again, I totally agree that PUC could really treat that.
Okay, so I'll just put if there are any studies that I'm not yet aware of, or it'd be great to bring them to my attention. I'm curious.
I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Romero, Mr. Sale, thank you for joining us and concluding with on the Workforce Investment Board. If we can have an update of the economic benefits.
Sure thing, and thank you very much, committee chairpersons, for inviting us to participate in this hearing. And it's been a very wide-ranging hearing with a lot of topics. And I guess since we're last on the agenda, so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, how can I kind of put a bow on all of this? And from the state board's perspective, obviously, our charge as a board, as a workforce investment board, is to advise the governor on high-level policy and guidance, and also to be a collaborator through the membership of our board and the Green Collar Jobs Council, which has been mentioned specifically for clean energy and green technology jobs, in terms of how do we bring together business, government, labor, all the key education, all the key partners and players to bring about really system change at the local level within California, where the persons who need jobs are walking in the door of a local one-stop center, looking for either placement or training services, and how can we bring this new emerging economy and these potential jobs and training opportunities to those people. And that's what we have been focusing on with the help of the previous legislatures through their passage and Governor Schwarzenegger's signing of the Green Collar Jobs Act in, I believe, 2008, that formally established the state board, or required the state board to establish a Green Collar Jobs Council, which we have established and have had running for a couple of years now, and also to develop a sector strategy approach. Javier is going to go through the slideshow and give you the details on all of those initiatives. What's important, though, is that our focus has always been, it's one thing here in Sacramento at the state level for us to say this is something that we need to do, or this is an important area, but we also realize that California is such a diverse state in so many different ways that really you have to have a data-driven regional approach because not all regions, economic regions, geographic regions of the state are similar. And this is where our 49 local workforce investment boards that Lenora also referred to earlier, and their partnerships and the business and government and education members on those local boards it becomes so important, because really for any large scale, I think, benefit and tangible result in terms of how many, we need to see a reflection of people actually getting jobs, actually getting sustainable employment in these jobs that are putting a dent in the state's unemployment rate. That really won't happen. It can't happen up here alone. It has to happen down at that local level. So Javier is going to give you an overview of what the state board has done with the funding that was made available to us to help in this regard. So Javier.
Thank you. The Green Collar Job Council, when it was formed, it was shortly thereafter we had the Recovery Act. We utilized that funding to form our Green Workforce Development Strategy. As Doug mentioned, it was sector-based, data-driven planning was essential, and it was regionally focused. So if we actually launched an initiative. The initiative is we collaborated on the Q-tip, in which Lenora and Panna both talked about. We were able to infuse sector strategies into that approach. We received a $6 million grant called the State Energy Sector Partnership, in which we were able to build upon Q-tips, but also infuse components of our regional industry clusters of opportunity grant process. Now, that's where really we refer to as the RICO. The RICO process basically is data-driven. It is regional focused, and what it is basically is it's a industry cluster strategy in which we funded 10 grantees to develop industry cluster initiatives. Now, the first part of that industry cluster strategy was regional diagnostics. Now, those regional diagnostics was based upon our consultant's analysis. Our consultant was Collaborative Economics. They also did the analysis for Next 10's Many Shades of Green report. This Many Shades of Green was a valuable resource for the Green Collar Job Council. They developed this picture of the state as far as energy efficiency goes. This went as far as 2008. There has been a report since then that shows that despite the recession, growth continues greatly, in which this does not reflect. But as you can see, throughout the state, there is growth. Energy efficiency is small in many of these regions, but is growing. But going back to our RICO process, with our consultant, we asked them to provide our grantees regional diagnostics, in which the regional diagnostic identified industry clusters of growth, really to demonstrate to them what was their regional specialization. So they identified clusters that were based on their employment growth, their industry growth, and the size of that industry. And those 10 grantees basically, with that information, that data, that diagnostic became a touchstone for them to engage in 3 more phases of that grant process, in which entailed joint priority setting. Joint priority setting, what that means is once you've identified your industry cluster of focus, you then engage those industry cluster employers, but with all your partners from economic development, education, labor, and CBOs. And so basically they've created these meetings in which they have these industry cluster employers to really talk to them, saying, this is what our data tells us. Now, why are you growing? What are your barriers to growth? It's what have you. And our grantees were local workforce investment board, but that discussion started that broadly. We did not start with a workforce discussion, because the nature of this grant was to support industry cluster growth, and which we view as essential to growth in the green economy, and more importantly to the recovery. And so basically from that phase, they identified shared priorities, and then they engaged in leverage strategies. So they basically come up with strategies on how, okay, here are the priorities. How then the host of partners around the table, how can we leverage our resources to address these priorities to grow this industry cluster that's essential to our regional economy? And finally, the final phase was sustainability planning. So they all received anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000. Their grants were made up of primarily Recovery Act dollars, but some of them actually got AB 118 dollars. Those that identified that industry cluster as an area of focus, Energy Commission also funded them. And so that resulted in industry cluster action plans, and which culminated by the ending of that grant period, which was June 30th of this year. And I just identified 3 of our 10 grantees, and just to give you some highlights of some of the strategies that emerged. This is Northern Region. Our grantee was Nortec. They have 11 counties now. Their industry cluster strategy entailed the green sector, primarily renewable energy, energy efficiency, and related firms. They were one of the AB 118 grantees, and also allied health. And you made the comment earlier, you asked the connection to energy efficiency to ROP and K through 16. Well, those are the partners that need to be at the table. So, for example, this project identified career pathways for the region in order to demonstrate to all their partners, be it K through 12 community colleges, to their Butte Community College, Chico State, to say, here's some of the pathways that are essential that we heard from our employer clusters, and so what have you. And then also they identified other issues affecting them, and this was their response. They're partnering to identify certificate programs that they're looking for that will respond to their needs, identify specialized training, and let me scroll down here. This one,
I think if we press the slideshow button, we might get the full picture right up there on that tab, right there. Just above. There you go. Click that.
Sorry.
And just forward a few.
I apologize. The final bullet, if you see at the bottom, become a West Coast National Alternative Fuels Training Center for propane and propane hybrids. Through this process, they uncovered an employer that was converting vehicles from your normal fossil fuel vehicle to propane. And they were doing this for Ford and what have you and so on, but to the scale. So he basically emerged this process and said, with a business opportunity. They investigated further, and there were other employers in the area that were interested as well. They brought this to us and basically said, here's an opportunity, there's a funding need here. And their funding need was really, in order to comply with CARB testing, they lacked the funding to do that testing, then to go commercial thereafter. And we basically brought it to the state, engaged ARB, Energy Commission, and immediately they called it an in-betweener. We didn't have funding for that. And so we all scratched our heads. The Energy Commission, to their credit, and this investment plan addressed that. And they are basically waiting for the solicitation for that funding to further that industry. So I highlight that just to demonstrate that engaging in this kind of activity does demonstrate how we could basically not only support industry cluster growth, but also further some of our policy objectives.
Interesting.
And here's the Sacramento region. Once again, these are just highlights. By no means is this the extent of their strategies. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because here they are. They identified energy efficiency along with clean transportation and green building as a focus. But a discussion today was about awareness. Part of their strategy of industry growth is, as a region, they want to raise awareness amongst the residents and the business community of basically the benefits of energy efficiency and to the business community, the impact to their bottom line. So yes, they are engaging their industry cluster, addressing their needs, their workforce needs, but they're also identifying a potential assistance in furthering that industry cluster in this region. So I highlight that for that reason. And once again, they also use this process to engage, to deepen their connections to community colleges and approve apprenticeship training programs. Now, another one I brought to your attention is the East Bay region. This is spearheaded by the Contra Costa Workforce Investment Board and the Solano County Economic Development entity there. And they have a very broad strategy. And these two bullets, they probably would not be happy with me if this is extended my representation of their effort. But I would encourage everybody to visit our website to view their industry cluster action plan, in which they have their clusters of they have manufacturing goals, they have clean energy goals, water technology, and they have a strategy behind each of those, and they already have commitments as to how they're going to utilize existing budgets, but they also identified needs in which they're looking for all of us to help them identify so that they could further their strategy regionally. And they've identified the resources. What they've done is they have Berkeley in the region. They have other education and labs, resources in the region that's going to drive R&D. They're connected to them. They identified their employers that are key to their growth. They brought them in. They identified all their resources, their governmental resources. And at the end of the day, like I said, it's an industry cluster approach. Get them all to behave like an industry cluster. And that is basically our objective. And if I were to basically leave you with something, this is something I think we're all familiar with, why I made reference to California being #1 by any green index that you find out there, is because, it's because of our policies, because of our innovation. It is because our consumers here tend to have sustainability as a concern. And so this brings the state to its prominence in the globe as far as being green. But how the future, where this all occurs, we say is regionally. And for us to be of any assistance, being with our programs, is that we have to organize and regionally. So as the Green College Job Council, the state board, and all our industry efforts, we're also working in the area of health. That's our basically our modus operandi moving forward is regional solutions, industry engagement, and also bringing forward the thought of policy alignment as economic opportunity. And that's our contact information. I would encourage you to visit our site. Under the Green College Job Council tab, you'll see our source documents where you can find an executive summary to the RICO process. And there you should be able to find all our action plans for each of these grantees.
Thank you.
And the one you mentioned in the Contra Costa Alameda area, the EDAB, the Employment Development Board, is involved in that one?
Which one?
Employment Development, what's EDAB?
They changed it. Used to be
Changed.
EDAP,
Now they've changed the
the
name.
Economic Development Advisory Board. Once upon a time it was called, right?
Yeah. Is that one of the
Partners?
regional
I know the two prominent players was the Contra Costa WIB and the Solano County WIB.
Oh, okay.
The Solano County Economic Development Center. Now they have a long list of partners.
Okay, so it probably isn't. Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay.
Questions? Well, this puts a new twist on that Energizer bunny that goes on forever and ever as we approach the 6-hour mark. I'd like to thank the Workforce Board for coming. I guess in closing, I'd say that we've heard some things about marketing and a campaign ad, or in heightening awareness or a lack of awareness that the consumer has, and this branding campaign that they'd like to see from, at least it's been suggested for the policymakers, that this is what we really need in right now in this energy efficiency challenge. We've got a lot of, thank you all for participating in the hearing today. Besides being long, it's been valuable and informative. The information we gather today, hopefully we can build on some of the progress that we've made and in the area of energy efficiency. The variety of employment investment opportunities in clean energy economy is great. The negative impact of the downturn of the economy is with us, but we see this sort of innovation and the big picture input that we had today is promising and buoys my optimism. We are planning a second and third or series of hearings that will look with the PUC and the utilities to bring them in and have their input on that. Those are my remarks. If you have anything else to add?
Thank you, Co-Chair. Yeah, I've found this very fascinating. I obviously am been involved in the energy area for a long time and have, I don't consider myself by any means an expert, but have a real interest and appetite for it. And I was struck by a lot of things that came, well, you know, that triggered thoughts in my own mind. One is, of course, as a state that's been in a deficit, we're always saying, well, how are we going to get the money for this? And yet, we're obviously spending a significant amount of money right now on a variety of programs, administering them, whether we're directly providing a subsidy or a grant, we're spending a lot in administration. And it struck me that it might be wise to not a wholesale, but to look at whether in some cases we might convert that funding into funding that directly did the retrofits. The other thing that struck me, I was kind of reminded, I was very involved in the late 70s, early 80s with the focus on waste reduction and dealing with the landfill crisis. And in doing so, we focused a great deal on trying to take out of the waste stream recoverable materials, in other words, recycling. But if we look up and down the state, most of that effort initially, well, good for the first more than 10 years, was put in the residential sector. And so a great deal of investment was made to try to get residences to recycle. Well, when you look at the total portfolio of waste production in the state, residence is less than a third. And if you look at the recoverable material, it's even less than that. So the majority of recoverable material is in industrial and commercial, and the majority of waste produced is in those two. Well, similar with energy. The majority of the energy demand is not from the residential sector. And it struck me that we may need to look more carefully at where we might put more emphasis on our high demand. Not eliminate our residential programs by any means, but look at how we could, try to ensure that some of our biggest demand is being reduced through our programs. Thus, we can reduce that peak load, and of course, that might provide us some more funding to then use it wiser in the residential markets. But there was a lot of things that occurred to me as the discussion went on, but it's very fascinating.
All right, and with that,
I want to thank our staff.
Oh, yes.